We're going to close out our week in the Psalms on our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast by looking at Psalm 47. This is a very different psalm than we've looked at so far this week. All the other psalms, we're finding the psalmist, sometimes David, sometimes somebody else, in turmoil. They're struggling inwardly or perhaps outwardly. It seems like most of the struggles that they were facing were inner turmoils, either caused by sin or other stresses of life or difficulties or concerns. We're not really told sometimes what is going on, but we do know that these psalmists were struggling, and they're seeking to find some footing in God, because they know anywhere else they turn, it's empty. There's no hope in anything else but God, and so they are being forced back to a place where they are hoping and trusting in the Lord. And they're realizing that He is God. As we saw in the last Psalm, cease striving and know that I am God. That is a universal promise and a command to us from God. Cease striving, know that I'm God. And if you want to overcome the stresses and difficulties of life, that is the key. We come to Psalm 47, though, and it's a very different psalm. It's a psalm of praise. It's just a pure-out praise psalm. Probably a song. We're not sure how the ancient Jews sang, but we know that many of these psalms were prayers, and many of them were also songs. And we're not sure how all that went together necessarily, but I could see this one definitely being a kind of a praise chorus sung in public worship or in the home, and they're praising God. And so we end our week in a high note of praise. And we'll start with a call to worship. And perhaps he's calling not just an individual to worship, but the congregation to worship. It's something special about the congregation of the people of God coming together in unity, in communion, to worship God together. And I think we're definitely called to do that throughout the Scriptures. He says here, "Oh, clap your hands, all peoples," not just yourself individually, but all peoples, "shout to God with the voice of joy." And so he's calling for a time of praise. He's calling for us to gather together. Let's clap our hands, he said. Let's praise him. Let's give him the joy that we should give him, because he is worthy of that in our lives. You know, we praise that which we adore. And so if we adore God, we're going to find ourselves praising him. And so we find the psalmist calling us to that kind of praise here. Then he gives us some reasons to worship the Lord. In verse 2, he says, because the Lord reigns. He says, for the Lord Most High is to be feared, a king, great king over all the earth. One of the reasons to praise him is simply because of his sovereign greatness. He's majestic, and he is in charge of all things. The Lord Most High, the king over all the earth. That is such a blessing to us when we live in a world of uncertainty. We never know what the news is going to say tomorrow. We never know what bank is going to collapse over here, or what interest rate situation may affect over here, or what war might start somewhere else, or drag us into it. There's so many uncertainties of life. Life is just filled with uncertainties. And so to know that the Lord Most High is to be feared, and he's the king over all the earth, is a reason to praise him. We can't say that of anything else. No government official, no military might, not ourselves, not our churches. Only the Lord is the king over all the earth. And that gives us great reasons to praise him. Secondly, because he has a special people. So we're looking here, and this is an Old Testament passage. So the reference here is to the people of Israel, who are God's people in the Old Testament. He says he subdues people under us. Under who? Under the Jews, the Israelites. And nations under our feet. He chooses our inheritance for us in the glory of Jacob, whom he loves. God has ascended with a shout, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet. So he's pointing out the fact that God has handpicked a people. And that is Old Testament truth that is reiterated in the New Testament. God chose a people. He chose Abraham to be the father of a nation. Abraham was not a follower of God. Abraham was an idol worshiper. We don't know if he had any interest in God at all, but God called him out, gave him a promise that if he would follow him, he would give a covenant to him. Abraham did that. Ultimately, Abraham had children, and ultimately the nation of Israel. And those people were God's people. When God brought them out of Egypt, it wasn't just a random group of people. It was the people he had promised, gave great promises to, a covenant through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This was his people. And so he is taking care of his people. Most of the Old Testament, or at least much of it, deals with how God is taking care of his people, warning his people, judging his people, whatever. It's his people. And he's talking about that here. And so he is a special people, and he is taking care of those people. And then also, we then come to verse 6, and he's praising the Lord again. A second call to worship, you might say. It says in verse 6, sing praises to God, sing praises to our King, sing praises. For God is a king over all the earth, sing praises with a skillful psalm. So again, he's saying, much like he did in verses 2 and 3, the Lord is worthy of praise because of who he is, because of his greatness. He deserves our praise. We adore him, and therefore he deserves our praise because of who he is. And so he calls on us to do that very thing. In verse 8, he kind of rounds it off. He says, God reigns over all the nations. And he says, God sits on his holy throne. That particular phrase is found a number of times in the Old Testament, that God is on his throne. And you've heard the cliche, which is true. If God is on his throne, then everything else is under his control. And if God is still on his throne, then we don't have all that much to worry about, because he is in control and he's in charge. So when we think about our lives and we think about the issues that we face, we are called in this psalm to just simply praise him, because we adore him, because he is great, because he's on his throne, and whatever comes our way, he is never caught off guard. He's always in control. He's always sovereign. And so that gives us a reason to praise him as a congregation of people and individually. And I trust that you and I will do that over this weekend. I hope this gives you a wonderful day in the Lord and a wonderful weekend as you go into that weekend. And when you congregate on Sunday with the people of God to worship and praise him together with God's people.